Hello and welcome to Overtime. We are covering an absolutely extraordinary situation in Florida. I think we all knew it was going to be bad. Uh, the hurricane has not yet made landfall. I was notified about an hour ago that there was a tornado we figured would probably need to go live. We started prepping to go live. During that time, a second tornado was spotted. These are confirmed by radar. So we notified all of our audience that we were going live, and in that period, another 4 tornadoes were spotted. I have not recently checked in the last 15 minutes, but at that rate, it would not shock me if there hadn't been more. I've just gotten notice of at least one more. These are PDS tornadoes. That means particularly dangerous situation. They have to come up with a better frigging title. Particularly dangerous situation really doesn't, in my view, mean anything. That's the definition of a tornado. But for, couldn't you say like extra dangerous tornado or something? No, particularly dangerous situation. So the PDS tornadoes are considered to be stronger, last longer, and do more damage than a standard tornado. So we have 6 tornadoes, all declared PDS. They are in Cape Coral, 2 in Cape Coral, West Palm Beach, Port St. Lucia appears to have one just to the west. And we don't yet have the location of the other one. These are extremely dangerous, even by tornado standards. I'm going to see if I can get an update and figure out how many tornadoes we are looking at now, but it is a minimum of 6. I paused in this note. We do now have a confirmed 7th tornado, and we'll try to get the location of that one. It looks like Fort Myers. So that would be the furthest. The other tornadoes were all on the east side. That would be the west side. In the center, we have a running cam of several different cams. It's a combination of different cameras throughout Florida. I paused it here in Tampa Bay because there is a crane. You can see a crane in between 2 buildings on the upper right there. The reason that's important, all construction companies were ordered to immediately take down or secure the cranes as best as possible. Those of you who remember our coverage in the past know that the cranes have done actually some of the most damage of anything in the immediate vicinity. One of those goes down and strikes a building. They can do serious amounts of damage. The problem is the warning came too late to take the cranes down. So there are construction cranes up throughout all of Florida. They are phenomenally dangerous. My suspicion is 𝐒𝐸𝐿 knows more about those than I do. Again, right now, they're all actually, the tornadoes appear to be centered around 𝐒𝐸𝐿𝐴𝐻𝑡𝑜n. I think it's pronounced 𝐒𝐸𝐿𝐴𝐻𝑡𝑜n. Florida, 1, 2, 3, 4 tornadoes there, and I'm going to look to identify where the other 3 are. But we had been planning on doing updates. This is just going to be an update, but my suspicion is at this point we are going to be live streaming most of this. I think it's going to be a long day for everybody, but I think it's worth doing our best to keep everybody up to date. I don't know. We'll talk about that. 𝐒𝐸𝐿, welcome. What are your thoughts?
Looking at the way that it, should have thought about that, but when you're looking at, it's like, okay, well, we have a hurricane coming in. One of the problems with easterly traveling hurricanes is that the wind shear between the prevailing winds, the jet stream, and the rotation of hurricanes can cause quite a lot of turbulence and can also throw off a lot of tornadoes, and was just talking about that earlier this morning, going, I'm surprised we don't see a lot of water spouts leading this in. And then you called me and it's like, yeah, we have confirmed tornadoes. And I'm like, okay, well, that makes sense. And we should have thought of that. But yeah, let's just add insult to injury and say, well, we were comparing this to tornado only on a much larger scale, and now we have tornadoes too. So it's not like it could, well, I never say it can get worse, but it's not shaping up to be a particularly pleasant day.
And yes, please.
Oh, and the cranes, yeah, you've got to have sufficient warning in order to take them down, because a lot of those cranes, especially in city cranes, the way those things are constructed on top of very tall towers, it actually requires another crane to be assembled next to it in order to start taking those pieces down. So trying to get them secured takes quite a lot of time, and there's a lot of exposure to winds to whip them around.
Yeah, they start to twist, and when they finally fail, it's a hell of a thing. You can see here, so this is live in Naples, Florida. All of the scenes that you're seeing here are live. It looks reasonably calm. One of the reasons is the hurricane has not yet hit. It has downgraded to a Cat 4. There are a number of sources, and we've shared with you some of the sources we use. And yesterday we spoke about this, and I think it's worth speaking about again. We knew that the second eye was forming. Now, this happens in particularly powerful storms. What this usually does is the second eye, well, not usually, to the best of my understanding, this always happens. The second eye kind of whips around and smashes back into the first eye and doubles the size of the storm. This is a reasonably common thing. This is what we were expecting, and this has now, in fact, happened. The storm is twice the size of what it was yesterday. We would like to remind people this does not mean it's a good news, bad news situation. Well, no good news, but the quote good news is it does not change the strength of the storm. That it just changes the size. It makes the storm twice as big. That is obviously still very bad news because it's twice as big in every direction. That means it's going to strike further north. There isn't land further south, really, for the size of this, but that means it's going to strike much further inland, and that means it's going to hit sooner and last longer, because even at the same speed, it's now twice as large, so it takes twice as long to go over the Florida. It is not more powerful, but it will be around a lot longer, and the effects will be felt sooner and for much longer. So this was something that was expected. It's been expected essentially since the beginning of the storm, and we notified our audience yesterday to expect it. It has happened. So when you see in the headlines, it's doubled in strength. Every prediction model for the damage that we've been discussing and working with so far predicted this. So this is not an unforeseen event. It's part of why for people who are saying, well, it doesn't look that big and we're not that worried. Yeah. We also do use, we like to rely on a number of different sources. One of them is a independent weather center called Max Velocity. He has called a number of hurricanes accurately, even over NOAA. He has said that he believes that this is going to strike as a Cat 4, not a Cat 3. He has been discussing the winds that come up from the south and strike the hurricane, and that will, in fact, diminish its strength. But he believes that NOAA is being overly optimistic as to how much it's going to weaken them. And by this point, those of us who have been keeping up with this on the Discord, you can find this in the Discord up to the second information on the Discord in the natural disasters section. We're keeping it out of breaking news because it's going to drown other breaking news that we need on other areas. So we're covering this in natural disasters, but based on the admittedly, amateur or sort of self-taught, what's the word I'm looking for, autodidact in us who know what they're talking about. The general consensus seems to be that we believe that NOAA is probably, it's going to be between a Cat 3 and a Cat 4, and I think a Cat 4 is as likely as a Cat 3, and that's not a significant change. Nonetheless, now we're looking at 7 tornadoes, and it hasn't even made landfall yet. So that's where we are. There's actually no severe warnings. It's just the current 7 tornado warnings, again, all centered around Clewiston. There is, well, not all, 1, 2, 3, 4 near Clewiston, 2 in Fort Myers, and so getting notifications in about as quickly as I can deal with them. So that's where we stand. Any thoughts, 𝐶𝐸𝐴ndering?
Yeah, I was wondering about the intensity because we were expecting it to. I mean, the winds have tapered off a bit. But when I started driving this morning, it was still being classified as a Category 5. So it's going to have to lose quite a lot of intensity in this last day before it starts making its progress onto land.
We've seen 2 different tracks. One says that it's going to make land around midnight tonight. Another one that says 2 a.m. tomorrow. That's about a 2-hour difference. I'm not sure. It looks like it's going to land somewhat further south than it was originally expected to. Good news, bad news. That means the northern ends of Florida isn't going to get hit as hard. The southern ends, that's the lowest altitude areas of Florida. It's the areas that most needed to be evacuated anyway. One of the bad news elements of this is actually the strongest part of the hurricane is just northeast of the eye. Just northeast of the eye is the strongest part, and by moving south, Tampa is going to avoid a direct hit, but it's actually going to get hit by the hardest part now, is what the current projection has, and it's going to be prolonged. So obviously, obviously, I mean, we are now at a minimum 12 hours from it actually striking. And the number of tornadoes is hovering roughly around 6 or 7 in the areas that we've already covered. What I'm going to do is see if there's any questions in the live chat, but I would strongly encourage anybody who's interested in this to go to our Discord and go to the natural disasters section. It is not a discussion section. If you want to discuss it, there's places in the Discord to discuss it, but it's really for us just to track news and to try to forecast this thing and try to understand what's going on. So, and by the way, we've had a number of new contributors who have been doing really a particularly good job, and we appreciate it. Everyone's been following the rules and making this so that we can do our job as best we can. So I'd like to appreciate everybody who's contributed. It's been a lot of people. We've been down for a while, so for a channel that's still coming back, I think it's been great. We've got a couple of altitude height maps. The other thing I'd like to discuss, and you may know more about this than I do. I've been trying to find someone who can explain the difference to me. So they are expecting in Tampa a 15-foot surge. So presumably what that means is that the water will be 15 feet higher than the normal height. That does not appear to be what that means, and I'm learning as much as I can about this, but the NOAA information that we put into the Discord said that the combination of swell and tide, swell, tide, and waves will actually be 33 feet. So what they're actually saying is that the watermark for basically the average increase in water is 33 feet. So anything that is below 33 feet, that's less than 33 feet above sea level, will be underwater. Not only that, but they say that in those conditions, the highest wave that you could see would be roughly double that number. So you're talking 33 feet of water and a 66 maximum wave height, striking the area. Just FYI, in Tampa itself, just basically central downtown Tampa, not the suburban Tampa areas, which start to go up into the hundreds of feet. But Tampa itself, the highest altitude is 48 feet. So we're expecting waves that will go over the highest altitude in Tampa itself. This is obviously, and we've talked about this before, this is already starting to be a catastrophic situation. The other thing we've got a lot of pictures of is from Hurricane, is it Helen? I don't know. Yeah. It was Helen, right? I think
that
so.
did. I need more.
That hit like last week.
Oh, that was Helene.
Helene, thank you. I knew I was. I'm going to be freebasing my coffee by the end of the day. Helene. So throughout Florida, basically what they've done is the very first step in cleaning up, which is you pile all the debris into one place. So there are piles of loose debris, extraordinarily dangerous debris throughout Florida, and it's about to get another hurricane. This is literally ammunition for the hurricane to just this is, again, what's going to make it so dangerous. And you pointed this out yesterday. It's the flying objects that's really the problem. Wind in and of itself can be terrifying, and there are winds here strong enough to pick a person up. But that notwithstanding, if a lamp post is flying through the air at 100 miles per hour and hits you,
it's going to be a bad day.
Yeah. So, and unfortunately, there is just a tremendous number of piles of debris. To be quite honest, it sounds from what I'm reading that obviously nobody knew. So we're not trying to Monday morning quarterback, but it's like honestly, it would have been better if all the debris had just been left in place instead of all being just put into. I mean, it's like loading ammunition. It's so.
Well, you stack everything up in one spot, and it starts getting higher. It creates a larger profile. It's a lot more likely to be picked up by winds. And then, of course, we're sending. I say we. Mother Nature is sending in little spinning spirals of chaos to rip up even more debris and throw it around in advance of the sustained winds. I mean, a hurricane has I'm going to get my terms all messed up here because we're talking about both things now. Tornadoes have very concentrated high velocity winds. But if you're farther away from the tornado, the farther away from the tornado you get, the less impactful the tornado is. You'll just have some winds and maybe some light blowing debris. And then the closer you approach the tornado, the more dangerous it becomes. And obviously, once you hit the tornado is the most dangerous place. But they're very limited in their scope. Whereas a hurricane has got everything spread out. It's lower winds, but for much longer durations. So you've got all these very small areas of devastation running through, ripping things apart. And then you're going to follow that along with a much longer, slightly less intense wind, but it's going to have much longer and a much wider reach to grab stuff and blow it around. In addition to the storm surge, picking up anything that didn't get picked up by the wind is now going to get picked up and moved by the water. So you have all of this debris that's going to be moved around by both winds and water. And that's probably the most devastating portions of both tornadoes and hurricanes is the moving debris. Causes way more damage than just the flooding. And obviously, this flooding starts to tear stuff apart and will bring down buildings. Then those buildings move and become underwater missiles to hit other stuff. And so as it progresses, the damage starts to grow because of the amount of debris in the water and in the winds. So not a good combination.
We may have footage of, so from the last hurricane, there was basically an entire, well, all right, Joe Biden is live now. We're going to see if we can snag that. Let's see, I wasn't ready for that audio.
While you're snagging that, I can explain the storm surge issue. when they're talking about the storm surge, they're talking about it's essentially the height of a column of water in front of the storm that the storm itself is generating. On top of that, you have swells. In the ocean, swells are generated by winds generally very far away. They start off as waves and they slowly meld into swells, and so swells are coming from a very long ways away. And then on top of that, you have local winds, which generate waves, which you can see. And you can also have swells and waves moving in different directions. And when it comes to coastal areas, you also have tides, as the tide coming in or tide going out. So generally, when they're talking about the storm surge, they're talking about the amount of water, the height of the essentially large wave, kind of like a tsunami of water. It's like, what is that height? And then on top of that, when it reaches shore, you need to figure out where are the tides going? Are tides coming in or going out? Tides going out will help minimize because it's pulling on that. It's a countervailing force against the surge. And you also need to know where the swells are coming from, what direction they're traveling, and then the local waves, which the local waves are going to be generated by the hurricane forces themselves, and will often end up moving in, or as the storm is coming in, those waves are usually moving at 90 degrees roughly to the storm surge, and then the swells could be moving in any direction at all. Generally from west towards the east, because that's the general prevailing winds, but they can also travel north and south and slightly northwest and southwest. So you have all of those together, and you have to look at what the conditions are on the side, which I think is one of the reasons why you ended up with high water marks throughout New Orleans, significantly higher than they stated the storm surge itself was, because you can get a perfect storm of all of them coming in together, and you get essentially wave amplification, and you can end up with water levels reaching tremendous heights. It can also work to mitigate the storm surge. So you may have a much higher storm surge, but not see it penetrate as high or as far because there's countervailing water motions that can minimize that. So it really, you have to look at what the local conditions are as the storm surge starts to approach.
All right.
They've gotten pretty good at modeling that.
Well, they've gotten pretty good at modeling it. The problem is I haven't seen very many people talk about those models and talk about, so when you see a 15-foot storm surge, that sounds bad enough, but it sounds, when you hear it, at least in my head, I'm sitting there going, oh, so if your altitude is 16 feet above sea level, you're fine. And it's like, no, and again, we saw that in Katrina, where the high water mark was in the, I think they had said that the storm surge was going to be 15 feet in Katrina. The high water mark was about 58 feet. So that's a very big difference. And my concern is what we're looking at is roughly the same thing here. We've looked at two models, one that and we unfortunately are not able to ascertain the credibility of either of these sources. They're not complete randos. But yeah.
A good way to look at storm surge versus the actual hot water marks or high water marks that you see is very similar to how they categorize like winds. So when you think about what are the sustained winds versus what are wind gustings too, so they have two separate measures. It's like, and you can look at the same thing as storm surge. That's a consistent height. So it's like when you say, okay, it's a 15-foot storm surge, well, that guarantees anything 15 feet or lower is going to have water. On top of that, then you have swells and waves, and the waves will start to bend. As the hurricane approaches, you're going to have local waves are going to be running fairly perpendicular to the storm surge, but as the hurricane approaches, those winds change and those waves are going to change directions. So right as you start making landfall, those waves are also going to be in the same direction as the storm surge. But that's like gusting winds. It's like those may, if the storm surge is 25 feet and then you have, say, 10-foot waves from local winds, which is not difficult. That's actually kind of small for the kinds of winds that we're talking about. Then you can end up where sections water will actually reach up to 35 feet, and then there'll be a trough of 25 feet, and then there'll be a wave, a height of 25 feet.
Jesus.
So you'll see areas, and then on top of that, swells out. We had to deal with swells in the Navy because we had to know what direction they're moving for to do underway replenishments. And the swells, depending upon the intensity of winds farther away and how long they've had to build up and what kind of pressure systems they've had to travel through, swells can be a few feet to 20 feet. So it really depends upon, and in the Gulf, the swells are generally quite a bit less because it's a protected body of water. So swells are generally significantly less inside the Gulf. So
the last NOAA projection that we had was for Tampa, 15 feet surge and 31-foot swells. So is there anything, what does that tell us, if anything?
That tells you that the potential, if everything lines up and runs together in the same direction, that you could end up with 46 foot just from the swell and the surge. You could end up with a high water mark of 46 feet. And then on top of that, you're going to have to add the local winds, local waves. So there's a difference between waves and swells. I think I'm repeating myself now. Swells are local winds, or waves are local winds. So you can have, you could be pushing, another 10, 15 feet of just wind waves coming in on top of that as well. The swells are more significant because they're a lot more durable and they're much larger. Waves can change very quickly. Local waves can change very quickly and change direction very quickly. Swells do not. They're going in a specific direction. It takes a lot of energy to redirect, slow down, speed up, etc. swells, because they're already coming from a very long ways away. They were generated from quite a ways away. And a hurricane can actually start swells well ahead of its path.
Well, and that was one of the reasons why we mentioned as well that even though this is at least still by NOAA projected to be a Category 3 when it lands, the swells are going to be equivalent to a Category 5 because it was a sustained Category 5. It put all that energy into the water, and there just isn't enough time at Cat 4 and Cat 3 for the swells to reduce to a Category 3 or even a Category 4 level. These are going to be Category 5 swells that they're going to see here, even if it's a Category 3 storm.
Yeah, even though we're reducing the amount of energy putting into both the surge and the swell generation, it doesn't have enough time to disperse, nor does it have enough distance to disperse because you're going towards an enclosed area with Florida sticking down. It can't just disperse out into the wider ocean, which is usually what disperses swells, is just distance and bleeding out of energy. The farther away from the center it gets, the less energy it has because the more area it's covering. And that's not really true in the Gulf. So on one hand, you have, here we go with hands. On the one hand, you have, a sheltered area, so you're not getting a whole bunch of swell from the Atlantic because it's fairly protected to try and get the swells through all of the different islands and through the fairly limited access of the Gulf. And on the other hand, if you start generating swell out in the Gulf, it has nowhere else to go and it has limited expansion, so it's not going to disperse until it hits something. And unfortunately, that something's land.
So we are waiting. President Biden and Vice President Harris have received a briefing on the current status of the hurricane, and they are going to presumably pass that briefing on to us. We're just waiting on the White House. We're on the White House official YouTube channel, so we're waiting there. What we're showing you is various live feed. It doesn't look bad so far, and in fact, I'm seeing in the YouTube comments for the feed a lot of Russian bots, and and I mean a lot of Russian bots. And comments that, oh gee, it doesn't look all that bad. It hasn't hit yet. We're 12 hours away from it getting bad, and we are down to 3 tornadoes. So that's a significant improvement. Right now, those tornadoes are all around 𝐍𝐢𝐜𝐴, something like that. They're west of Port St. Lucia, and it looks like the Lake Placid area has 2 hurricanes in that vicinity, and one just west of Port Port St. Lucia is what we are looking at, and they are still the PDS, the extraordinarily dangerous tornadoes. These are not classified as a normal tornado. They have the potential to be last longer and be even more damaging. So we are waiting on Joe Biden and Vice President Harris to speak, and in the meantime, as I said before, and we've already dropped the link, the Discord is. We're keeping an eye on all of this on the Discord. So if you want to join us and keep an eye with us on the Natural Disasters channel, we're keeping an eye on the status of the hurricane. The latest from OSHA that I'm reading here is, let's see, they're reminding people to have multiple methods of getting warnings, not just one. You don't know which one's going to be the first one, and you don't know if you may lose one. And let's see, they will post an update 1 p.m. Eastern Standard. So we're still looking at two different projections. One has it hitting, making landfall tonight at midnight. Another one has it making landfall at 2 a.m. Either way, it's going to be, it looked originally like a direct strike on Tampa. It now looks like it's going to be somewhat south of Tampa, and that's actually a problem because the strongest part of the hurricane is actually going to be just north of the eye and a little west of it, and that's exactly where Tampa's going to get hit. So, yeah. So let's
been watching a few people that have gone to social media to let them know to let everybody know that they're riding this storm out. One individual was standing in front of his home showing off. It's like, hey, when Helene came through, I only lost a few shingles, and I've got these awesome hurricane windows. And I know a little bit about hurricane windows, but I was like, it's been a while since I've looked them up. Because I was interested in those windows because they're also very good at stopping burglary, because they're essentially like the windshield on a car. They're glass sandwiched between essentially a plastic in the middle. And so I went and looked it back up, and I'm like, okay. So they haven't gotten that much better since I last kind of looked at them. They're supposed to be able to stop a 2x4, a standard 2x4, at about 115 miles per hour. It doesn't mean that the window comes out unscathed. You will have to replace the window. It'll stop it from traveling all the way through the window, unless, of course, it's traveling in a straight line lengthwise and hits dead center and perpendicular to the plane of glass, in which case it can punch through the window. So I looked up where this guy, the general location of where he was at. He didn't give an exact location. And then I looked at where Helene was, and I'm like, okay, well, you didn't actually get directly hit by Helene. However, you are a lot closer to the center of where this tornado. Again, we've got now tornadoes and hurricanes together. And so now I'm going to start mixing them up. This hurricane is going to be much closer to making a direct strike to where this individual was. And the general elevation of where he's at is anywhere from 80 to 120 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm thinking, okay, but unfortunately there's not all that far from a waterway, which does have a somewhat straight line. It does meander a little bit, but overall it's a generalized straight line towards the ocean. So I'm thinking, you don't have any idea what you're staying for. You haven't boarded up your windows, which actually, if you're going to stay, is probably a good thing, because now you have avenues of escape instead of being trapped inside your house when the water inevitably starts to fill it. But yeah, it's like you lost some shingles the first time, but you did not get hit like this the first time. And I unfortunately can't speak directly to him because he's just making posts, and I'm praying for that person, and I'm not a religious person.
Well, and I'd like to point out, so there are two things. I'll address one that I addressed yesterday. Well, but let me ask you first, why is it usually important? Why does it matter if a window breaks during a hurricane or a tornado?
One, it allows more debris to come in. It allows a much faster route for water to fill. And because the wind-facing windows are the ones that are generally getting struck by debris first, they're going to be broken out first. That's also the direction the water is coming from. So, hydraulic pressure is going to push water inside of the home. Water levels will rise faster inside the home than they are outside of the home, and it starts making a big trap. And you can't get out of the windows that water is coming into. You can't move against that. So, you can get trapped against the far side of the house, where water is being stopped by the interior walls, and now you're trapped. You can't get out, because as soon as water starts getting much over 3 feet, much over essentially waist high, trying to open interior doors or exterior doors is nearly impossible. And the higher the water gets, the harder it's going to be. And all this water is applying force against the opposite side. So yeah, it's really not a good idea to have exposed windows. On the other hand, upper windows you want to be able to open, because as long as water hasn't gotten to them, you can still get them open and actually get out of the house. Because once you realize, oh crap, we have water coming up to chest high on the bottom level and I'm kind of stuck here, you're not opening the door to get out. So if you don't have some sort of escape on the leeward side, you aren't getting out of that house, and you're just probably going to end up drowning.
Which was a huge cause of the deaths during Katrina. The other problem too is, especially if there's a tornado or extraordinarily high winds, as soon as a window breaks, the winds can get into the house, and then the problem is your roof isn't designed to. In these areas, it's better built for this, but in general, roofs are not designed to keep pressure from the bottom from going up. They're designed the other way. They're designed to keep rain from coming down. They're designed to keep snow and pressures from above coming down and going into the house. When you reverse it, what you have is very much like when you open an umbrella in high winds. The winds just catch it, so they can actually catch the entire roof of your house, lift the roof off. As soon as the roof is off, all four walls are coming down. So this is one of the reasons why you see houses get flattened. They don't even need a direct strike from a tornado to flatten them. All they need is any kind of debris to open.
Hurricane Milton will make landfall on the western coast of Florida. Winds will be fierce at well over 100 miles per hour, with storm surges reaching up to 15 feet and up to 18 inches of rain. It's looking like the storm of the century. I'm here with leaders of my administration who are in the front lines preparing for this storm, and will brief me in our latest efforts. To save lives and livelihoods, I want to emphasize a few things. First, many communities in Hurricane Milton's path do not have a moment to catch their breath between Helene and Milton. 2 historic storms in 2 weeks. I want to thank everyone who has followed local guidance to evacuate ahead of landfall. I know it's really tough leaving behind your home, your belongings, everything you own. But I urge everyone in Hurricane Milton's path to follow all safety instructions as we head to the next 24 hours. It's literally a matter of life and death. Second, for the last week, my team has done everything possible to prepare for this storm. I immediately approved emergency declarations in Florida and the Seminole Tribe in Florida. I also surged search and rescue teams, water, food, power generators, ambulances to the region. In my direction, Administrator Criswell will be in the State Emergency Operations Center in Florida tonight. And Kamala and I are going to keep pressure on the companies so prices stay stable on gasoline, flights, and goods people need. Finally, we're teaming up with state and local officials to support impacted communities. I spoke with the Florida Governor DeSantis, with Mayor Castor, the Tampa Mayor, the Clearwater Mayor, Rector, and the Pinellas County Chairwoman, Peters. I offer them everything we need, everything we have, everything they need. And I made it clear to them they should reach out if there's anything more they need. I gave them my personal phone number here at the White House to contact me directly if that's necessary. Let me close with this. I want to thank the governors of all the affected areas over the last couple weeks. Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, Virginia. We've been in constant contact. and they've been very thankful and appreciative of the help the federal government is providing. And I'm appreciative of all they're doing as well. And I've told them to contact me with anything else they need. We have made available an unprecedented number of assets to deal with this crisis. We're going to continue to do so until the job is done. But now I want to be clear about something. For the last few weeks, there's been a reckless, irresponsible, and relentless promotion of disinformation and outright lies that are disturbing people. It's undermining confidence in the incredible rescue and recovery work that has already been taken and will continue to be taken. And it's harmful to those who need help the most. There is simply no place for this to happen. Former President Trump has led the onslaught of lies. Assertions have been made that property is being confiscated. That's simply not true. They're saying people impacted by these storms will receive $750 in cash and no more. That's simply not true. They're saying the money is needed for this crisis is being diverted to migrants. What a ridiculous thing to say. It's not true. Now the claims are getting even more bizarre. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, a congresswoman of Georgia, is now saying the federal government is literally controlling the weather. We're controlling the weather. It's beyond ridiculous. It's got to stop. In moments like this, there are no red or blue states. There's one United States of America, where neighbors are helping neighbors. Volunteers and first responders are risking everything, including their own lives, to help their fellow Americans. State, local, and federal officials are standing side by side. Let me repeat, no one should make the American people question whether their governments will make sure that this disaster, when it strikes, they'll be there. We will, all of us. I'm going to turn it over to Vice President Harris, if that's okay with all of you. Thank you. Madam Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Liz, thank you for the work that you have been doing. As the President said, we've been working around the clock to prepare for Hurricane Milton and to ensure that people are safe, including ensuring federal, state, and local resources are being coordinated in a smart and efficient and effective way. We have also been in constant contact with the leaders in Florida to make sure that we are cutting any red tape that might get in the way of getting relief to folks, to make sure also that communities receive the resources and the support that they need as quickly as possible. Already, we have sent more than 1,000 federal personnel to be on the ground in Florida to assist with what needs to happen in the state to prepare for this hurricane, and we will continue to scale up those efforts. To the people of Florida, and in particular, the people of the Tampa region, we urge you to take this storm seriously. As has been said before, this is a storm that is expected to be of historic proportion. And many of you, I know, are tough and you've ridden out these hurricanes before. This one's going to be different. And so we ask you that by every measure, understand it's going to be more dangerous, more deadly, and more catastrophic. So please listen to your local officials. They know what they're talking about. They know what they're doing. And if you are told to evacuate, please evacuate immediately. Do not wait until it is too late. And in the hours and days ahead, President Biden and I and our administration will continue to do everything we can to protect the people who have been in the path of this storm. And once the storm has passed, we will be there to help folks recover and rebuild, as we continue to do for those communities in Florida, Georgia, North and South Carolina, and across the Southeast who have been devastated by Hurricane Helene. Finally, as the President mentioned, to any company or individual that might use this crisis to exploit people who are desperate for help through illegal fraud or price gouging, whether it be at the gas pump, the airport, or the hotel counter, know that we are monitoring these behaviors and the situation on the ground very closely, and anyone taking advantage of consumers will be held accountable. The bottom line is this hurricane poses an extreme danger, and we urge everyone in Florida to take extreme caution. And we are with you, and we will get through this together. And with that, I will hand it over to Homeland Security Advisor Liz Sherwood Randall.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Mr. President, Madam Vice President, you will now receive a briefing on the latest forecast for Hurricane Milton and actions that we have taken to prepare for it and be ready to respond to it. You'll hear from Administrator of FEMA, Deanne Criswell, the Director of the National Hurricane Center, Mike Brennan, the Director of the National Weather Service, Ken Graham, Secretary of Homeland Security, Ali Mayorkas, and the Commandant of the Coast Guard, Admiral Linda Fagan. We'll begin the briefing with Administrator Criswell. Over to you, Deanne.
Thank you, Liz. Mr. President, Madam Vice President, I just want to assure you we are taking this storm very seriously. As you will hear from Dr. Brennan shortly, Milton is currently a Category 4 storm and will remain a hurricane as it crosses over Florida. At your direction, Mr. President, I will be traveling down to Tallahassee tonight to embed at the state EOC to meet with my team as well as our state partners. And I will be there to assess the damages and the impacts immediately following the storm, working in close coordination with the state to ensure that they have everything that they need to support their priorities. As you have always directed me to do, I am leaning forward to make sure that we are strategically placing our resources and our teams to be able to rapidly respond in Florida. There are currently over 1,000 federal personnel on the ground in Florida supporting the efforts from Hurricane Helene, as well as the previous storms that have happened over the last few years. And I have directed, at your direction, an additional 1,200 search and rescue personnel from FEMA, the Coast Guard, and the Department of Defense to stage in Florida so they are ready to take action as soon as Milton makes landfall. This also includes 30 high water vehicles, helicopters, as well as boats to be able to go in and support the counties and the states as needed. I've also moved over 500 ambulances to help assist with the response, 6 incident management assistance teams one specifically into Tampa and others throughout the region, multiple power assessment teams, and dozens of medical facility assessment teams so they can go in and check on the health and medical facilities as soon as the storm passes. And Mr. President and Madam Vice President, I have also moved millions of meals and liters of water into Florida to be able to support any of those immediate needs. I really appreciate, Mr. President and Madam Vice President, your continuous effort to help lift up the warnings and the guidance that you just gave about what people need to do in the path of Hurricane Milton. This is an extremely dangerous storm, and we need all of the residents that are in the path of the storm to listen to their local officials. They will tell you if there's still time to evacuate or what you need to do if you are still where you're at. They will give you the right information about what you need to do to protect yourself where you are at right now. Sometimes just traveling a few miles inland can mean the difference between life and death, and nobody has to lose their life as a result of this storm. So in short, Mr. President and Madam Vice President, I assure you we are taking this storm extremely seriously. We are focused and we are ready to support the people of Florida.
Dan, you're doing a hell of a job. You always have. We've been through a lot of this together, all three of us, including the Vice President. And I have one question right now, though. What are you most worried about today and into tomorrow? And what messaging can we do to help people in the hours before it makes landfall?
Mr. President, the biggest concern is making sure people have gotten out of harm's way. Over the next 24 hours, we are going to see significant winds. We are going to see storm surge. We are going to see flooding from the rain. People need to be able to take this storm seriously. They need to move, if they still have time to move, out of harm's way. And we are prepared to support Florida with additional search and rescue assets to help save lives. That's our immediate concern, Mr. President, is saving lives over the next 24 hours.
Have you ever seen a storm like this one since you've been in charge?
I think this is going to be one of the biggest ones that we have seen after it makes landfall. I mean, we saw a lot of impact from Hurricane Ian, but this one is different. This one just looks different, and I think we're going to have a lot of impacts and people that are going to need our help, sir.
Well, thank you very much.
Administrator Criswell.
Yes, ma'am.
Are we concerned about any misinformation or disinformation regarding evacuations that we need to clear up at this point?
There's been a lot of misinformation out there, Madam Vice President, that's for sure. But I have not heard anything specific to the evacuations. I think that the local officials, the state officials have been very strong in getting that message out there and getting people to move out of harm's way. I was in Florida on Monday and met with the mayor of Tampa as well as the mayor of St. Petersburg, and we saw people evacuating. And so they are listening to their local officials, and that was encouraging.
That's great. Thank you.
I think we'll move on then. Thank you, Administrator Criswell. We'll move to Director Brennan from the National Hurricane Center.
Thank you, Liz. Mr. President, Madam Vice President, good afternoon. As Administrator Criswell mentioned, we are just hours away from seeing a potentially catastrophic hurricane landfall along the west coast of Florida, with the center of Milton expected to cross the coast late this evening or very early tomorrow morning. Is a powerful major hurricane and a large hurricane at that. We are already seeing multiple life-threatening hazards playing out across Florida. We have multiple tornado warnings in effect across portions of southern Florida. We're seeing winds increasing, heavy rainfall spreading across much of the state. And conditions are going to rapidly deteriorate over the next few hours, especially where landfall is going to occur along the west coast. That's where we're expecting that devastating storm surge of as much as 10 to 15 feet above ground level, from somewhere near the Tampa Bay region southward to Port Charlotte, with significant storm surge extending hundreds of miles even farther south to the Fort Myers and Naples area. And that is why we have been supporting so many evacuation decisions to get people away from that devastating storm surge. Time is running out now for people to leave along the west coast before conditions deteriorate further. Additionally, Milton is going to be a powerful hurricane when it makes landfall and move quickly across the state and remain at hurricane intensity as it moves across Florida tonight and as it enters the western Atlantic during the day tomorrow. So that is going to bring the risk of hurricane conditions to much of the central portion of the state. We have hurricane warnings in effect from Fort Myers up through Tampa to Cedar Key along the west coast, all the way through the I-4 corridor across Orlando to Daytona Beach, up to St. Augustine, including the Cape Canaveral area and the east coast down to Port St. Lucie. So a large area is at risk of seeing devastating wind impacts, widespread power outages, structural damage. And that could lead to a very unsafe environment after the storm, where we tend to see a lot of post-storm fatalities in this very dangerous environment that's left. Additionally, we are expecting very heavy rainfall, 6 to 12 inches, amounts as high as 18 inches across the heavily populated I-4 corridor from Tampa to Orlando to Daytona Beach, which could lead to widespread catastrophic and life-threatening flash flooding and urban flooding tonight and into Thursday in that area. And that's an area where we lost about 16 people in Hurricane Ian to that same type of flooding. So there's a tremendous risk to both life and property there. I do want to thank the administrator and FEMA and
Pausing this for a minute, we are now up to 10 tornado warnings. We've had a number pop up in Fort Myers, Cape Coral. All of them are sort of in the 𝐍𝐢𝐜𝐡𝐨𝐥𝐚𝐬 area, but so that's actually still all southern. It's all south of Palm Bay, but that we've had a sudden jump. We were down to 4. We are back up well past that now. We are up to 10, and I wanted to notify our audience that's all really around. Let me see if I can actually get the name there. But Cape Coral and just west of Port St. Lucia, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 west of Port St. Lucia, and 6 in the vicinity of Cape Coral. So that's what we're looking at for tornadoes now. That was just a sudden jump, and so I'm interrupting the White House live stream. We're going to go back to that now.
For her team's support and our coordination on that. And I finally want to thank the NOAA and Air Force Reserve hurricane hunters who've been flying into Milton for days now, providing us just tremendously valuable direct data that has really helped inform our life-saving forecast and warnings. So thank you, Mr. President, Madam Vice President.
Mike, I know you're tired of hearing from me. I've been talking to you so much lately, but I appreciate your constant input you've given me and let me know what's going on. What more can you tell us about how the location of this storm is going to affect the storm surge in Florida? I I mean, because that's
Yeah.
pretty consequential, right? The surge. I mean, that's what you're focusing on.
Yes, Mr. President, that just a shift of a few miles in the landfall location will make a big difference in what area sees that very worst storm surge. So a track of the center to the north of Tampa Bay would push the highest storm surge into Tampa Bay itself. A track 5 or 10 or 20 miles south would push that higher storm surge, say, down to the Sarasota, Port Charlotte area. Even as close as we are to landfall, it's not really possible to tell exactly where that worst surge will occur. It's one wobble away from shifting 10 or 20 miles. So that's why we've conveyed that risk across such a large area to help support the evacuation of much of that west central coast of Florida.
But Tampa Bay is particularly vulnerable, correct?
Correct. Yes, Mr. President. It's one of the most vulnerable locations along the entire west coast of Florida because water gets funneled up into the bay. If you were to see a worst case scenario there, you could see storm surge as much as twice as high as they saw during Helene, where it got up to 7 or 8 feet in the bay. It could potentially get up above 10 feet in this event.
Well, thanks a lot, Mike. I appreciate it.
Hey, Mike, it's
Yes.
good to see you again, and thank you for all your work. So for the folks who have been living in Florida a long time and have experienced these storms many times, how are you talking with them about how this is going to be different? And so the difference between what they're used to and what this will be as a way to hopefully give them more encouragement to know that they need to get out.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Vice President. Yes, we've been emphasizing the size and the intensity of the storm and the direction at which it's approaching, which is unusual and really raises that storm surge risk for the west coast of Florida. We typically see hurricanes approach the west coast of Florida from the south or southeast, moving parallel to the coast. This track more perpendicular to the coast really raises the storm surge risk. And the size of the storm is going to produce hazardous impacts across much of the peninsula. So we've been hitting the surge risk on both coasts, actually, the hurricane force winds, the flooding rainfall threat, the tornadoes, and trying to re-emphasize the scale and breadth of the threat, which is somewhat unusual for Milton.
Thank you, and thanks for your good work. It's good to
Mike,
see
one
you
more
again.
question.
Yes, sir.
For people listening, what is the width of the state of Florida from the Tampa Bay area across to Sebastian Inlet in that area to Palm Beach? What kind of distance are we talking about?
Across the state of Florida, you're probably talking about, 150, 200 miles. That's an estimate, but the storm's going to be moving at 15 miles per hour. So it's going to be moving across that area very quickly. And the tropical storm force winds, the 30, 40 mile per hour winds or greater, now extend almost out more than 200 miles from the center. They're going to get even larger as the storm approaches the coastline. So that's going to cause those wind impacts to affect much of the state.
The reason I asked the question is I think, at least for me, having done a lot of this the last 3 years, emphasizes the consequential damage this storm can do. I mean, it's going to enter Florida on the west as a hurricane and leave as a hurricane. And that's pretty unusual. Anyway, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will move on now to the National Weather Service Director, Ken Graham.
All right, thanks, Liz. I appreciate it, and wanted to thank Administrator Criswell for everything through this, and Dr. Brennan as well. The Hurricane Center has been really focused on this and on it with such a great forecast the whole way. I just wish we could minimize those impacts, but that doesn't look like what's going to happen. So, Mr. President and Madam Vice President, we continue to work at the National Weather Service with our federal, state, and local decision makers during the storms. Look, we actually have our scientists embedded with FEMA, the state and local emergency operations centers, and we also have our scientists embedded with the U.S. Coast Guard District 7 to really help out with these decisions to make sure they're right there to answer the questions as they come up. They're covering really the subtleties, as you've mentioned in this forecast. Dr. Brennan mentioned those small changes can make a big difference. Little wiggles really do matter. Those small wobbles make a difference in the storm surge. And all these big storms, they wobble and wiggle all the way in. We'll see that happening as this gets closer to landfall. So as Administrator Criswell said, listen to those local officials. I can't stress enough, 30 years with NOAA, 30 years in the Weather Service. This is a particularly dangerous track. People really need to be getting into their safe locations as the impacts start deteriorating really quickly over the next few hours. Words really matter in these storms. Even if the winds decrease somewhat near landfall, we really try to avoid words like weaken. It really gives a false sense of security to the public. So we really want to stress that no matter what happens to that, the wind speed in the system, catastrophic impacts will result either way. The size of the wind speed, the actual size of it will be expanding, as Dr. Brennan was saying. So much of that impact will cover most of the peninsula. And Mr. President, like you said, Milton, think about it. It just goes over my mind over and over. Milton will enter as a hurricane and exit as a hurricane. So you'll see damage from the landfall point on the west coast, and you'll see damage on the east coast as well. So it's really important to focus on those impacts. Again, seeing those impacts on both coasts, we're really starting to see the impacts as we speak. I was just looking at the radar before doing this meeting here, and we've got tornadoes already touching down in some spots in Florida, and some have confirmed that have touched down as well. And about 90% of those tornadoes occur on that right front quadrant of a tropical system. So we're really, our folks are at the Weather Service are on duty 24 hours a day, watching that radar to make sure that we can get those warnings out quickly to people so they can take cover. And as Dr. Brennan said, think about it, Mike, right, 140 miles wide. Now we're 200, and we expect it to be greater than 240 miles away from the center with these winds. So that's a huge area that we can see some of that damage. Very concerned about the storm surge, and I wanted to double down on something. It's not just Tampa Bay with that 8 to 12 foot forecast, or 10 to 15 down to Boca Grande. I mean, you could see 5 to 8 feet of storm surge all the way down to 𝐍𝐜𝐜𝐸. Think about Fort Myers, Naples, well away from that center. We just got to really keep reminding people they're not safe, even though you're not near the center of the storm. So we'll continue to really message that as we can. The other part of this, flooding could last a while. So unlike other areas with elevation, there's not much elevation in Florida. So some of these rivers are going to be slow to drain. Some of these rivers could stay up for about a week after the storm, and the storm surge will act as a blocker to drain some of that rain from the inland area. So that could really be add some challenges to some communities with the flooding and recovery efforts, as some of the roads will be pretty impassable. So, I was looking at this, Mr. President, Madam Vice President. Yesterday I said the clock was ticking. Today I'm saying the alarm bell's going off. People really need to start getting into their safe place. And as always, the Weather Service remains on duty 24/7 to make sure the decision makers have all the information they need and the updates to this storm.
Ken, I'd like to focus on one thing you said. I don't think most people would think it, but the idea that sometimes it takes days for rivers to crest after a major storm like this. Are there any particular areas of concern that that are related to this type of flooding? And how long do you think the flooding conditions could last? In other words, I think people think once the winds are died down and have gotten through that, okay, we're all set. But these rivers flooding are consequential, and it takes time, right?
It takes time. That storm surge pushes up every nook and cranny of Florida. So it goes up bays, goes up rivers, it fills in all these areas. And then you add that incredible amount of rainfall, and that rain can't drain because the storm surge has it blocked. So just really looking at some of the areas in Hillsborough River, Alafaya River, the Peace River, some of these type of traditional places that could flood. We really got to watch those areas and those communities. So it takes quite a while for that water to drain.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Ken, I have a question for you. You mentioned words matter, and I know there's a lot of media following this briefing. So there have been, we've gone from a Cat 5 to a Cat 4, and the language that a lot of folks have been using is downgrade. But it sounds like you're cautioning us that may communicate a sense that the danger is lessened when in fact it's not. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know a lot of folks are watching right now and would love to have your feedback on how we should be talking about this.
Yeah, we need everybody that communicates to the public to be on the same page with the words, because I've 30 years of doing this. I've seen this so many times. People will think, oh, it was a Cat 5, now it's a Cat 3. That's not a reason to relax. It's not weakened. That's not diminished. That means that we've expanded the wind field. The impacts don't change associated with that. And I've seen this in Hurricane Florence and other historic hurricanes. So we have to be mindful of the words that we use and focus on those impacts. Those impacts haven't changed no matter what the wind speed does over the next 24 hours.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Graham. We'll go now to Secretary Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security. Ali, over to you.
Thank you very much, Liz. Mr. President, Madam Vice President, if I can just pick up on the important phrase, the words matter. I want to thank you for the strength and moral clarity with which you have been speaking to bat down false information that is being spread. That false information is only hurting survivors in need of help. And it is also hurting the first responders who are so bravely risking their lives to deliver that help to the survivors. Mr. President, Madam Vice President, we are executing on your directive to not only rely on FEMA to provide emergency relief, but to draw upon other resources throughout the Department of Homeland Security and throughout the federal government, throughout your administration. I know you will hear from the Commandant of the United States Coast Guard, Linda Fagan. The United States Coast Guard has deployed almost 1,300 personnel to Florida, not just for search and rescue, but also to ensure the safety and security of the port of Tampa, which is a critical lifeline for supplies that are needed by Florida and elsewhere. I want to also say that our U.S. Customs and Border Protection has devoted search and rescue personnel as well as other parts of our department. To give you just a quick snapshot of some of the resources that are devoted from other parts of the administration, the Department of Defense is providing search and rescue, commodity movement, commodity distribution, and security to Florida. We already have 1.5 million meals and 2.8 million liters of water ready to provide to people in need. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is providing temporary power, temporary roofing, debris removal support, and engineering expertise. The U.S. Forest Administration is also providing debris removal. This is absolutely critical so that our search and rescue personnel can reach the people in need and provide them with the humanitarian relief upon which they rely. Health and Human Services is providing hospital and health-related support. The Small Business Administration has dedicated 137 personnel to assist people who have lost or whose businesses are destroyed, to get them back up on their feet and understand what resources are available to them. We have an entire administration dedicated to this effort at your direction. And with that, I'll pause.
Hey, Ali, Mr. Secretary, do you have everything you need from all the federal departments and the agencies in support of this response? Is there anything lacking?
We certainly do have all of the resources. We are well positioned to continue to respond to Hurricane Helene, to respond to Hurricane Milton. Mr. President, we are meeting the moment and meeting the challenges because of the extraordinary people who've spoken before me.
Well, I want to thank the governors. They've stepped up. All this disinformation going out about how, we're devoting all this money to migrants, and even one congresswoman suggesting that I control the weather and implying that I'm sending it to red states. It's stuff off the wall. It's like out of a comic book. But, people, when they're in trouble, or for example, and I asked this to our administrator, they said that you get $750 and that's it. You lost everything, you get $750. That's not it. That's just you give you immediately what you need to get by the next day, to get a prescription, to get a whatever. Are you getting calls already about what we're going to be able to deliver for people who get in trouble?
We are, Mr. President. Let me say that one of the false narratives is that the federal employees who are actually delivering assistance will take an individual's land. And that is causing individual survivors not to approach the people who are there to help and obtain the relief to which they are entitled and that we have available to them. And the Vice President knows very well, as a former prosecutor, that false information only is fuel for the criminal element to exploit individuals in positions of vulnerability. And Madam Vice President, your words at the outset were so very important for that reason.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, I want to thank you and the folks in your agency working with FEMA, NOAA, and all the federal agencies. I've been on the ground, and the work that you all have been doing to coordinate with local and state law enforcement and first responders has been outstanding. It really does show the best of the kind of work that we do in a moment of crisis to work together. So I applaud the folks that work with you and your leadership in that regard.
Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas. We'll go now to Admiral Linda Fagan, the Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard.
Thank you, Mr. President, Madam Vice President, and I want to assure you that the Coast Guard is ready to respond. We continue to monitor the storm closely and are mindful of how dangerous and devastating the storm is and the potential to the region, which is still recovering from Hurricane Helene. My senior field commanders are well integrated with both the state and local emergency responders and have stood up incident commands. We continue to surge personnel and assets from across the country into the region. And I want to highlight how we prepare for storms. And so we have people in helicopters and aircraft and boats and cutters that would have been in harm's way for the passage of this storm. And we have sorely moved those people and assets out of harm's way for the storm. They are ready and positioned to begin to move back into the region as soon as it is safe to do so. In addition to the aircraft and ships and boats, it includes shallow water boats, medical teams, pollution response teams, crisis support teams. Our top priority is saving lives and safeguarding the marine transportation system. This also includes responding to any pollution incidents. We will begin to move back into the region as soon as it is safe to do so, with our primary initial focus being life-saving work and reopening the ports to re-enable the flow of commerce. I want to focus just for a minute on the Port of Tampa, which is the largest port in Florida. And depending on the impacts of the storm, there could be some impacts to the port and commerce flow. We will conduct overflights as well as bring ships into the region to ensure that the channel and the harbor is clear and safe for commercial traffic. We will work with the Army Corps of Engineers and others to do those assessments. We'll work to reestablish the aids to navigation constellation and work with the pilotage in the area to ensure that ships are able to move safely in and out of the Port of Tampa. We'll also need to ensure that the port has electricity for handling cargo and cargo flows. So I share this with you, Mr. President, because we are myopically focused on regaining commerce flows into the Port of Tampa once the assessments are able to be made. It does take a little bit of time, but we will move with all urgency to ensure that Tampa is reopened for commerce and commercial flows. We continue to monitor the storm closely. And a number of our briefers have spoken on the need to heed the evacuation orders. And just like to emphasize that my first responders, and as one of the critical first response agencies post a hurricane response like that, my first responders have moved out of harm's way and are not in the path of the storm. They are ready for immediate reconstitution into the area, and you will see them moving quickly. But as the storm effects come on, people really need to move into safe positions so that they do not lose their lives. Mr. President, your Coast Guard is ready to respond, and we are well positioned for that. Thank you, sir.
Admiral, one of the things that I don't know whether people have not been through any kind of hurricane in the past may not understand is that when the rainfall and the flood surge are significant, but these elevated water levels are likely to be accompanied by large and destructive waves. It's not just the water rising, there's significant waves. And what do you anticipate, if anyone else wants to respond, what do we anticipate in terms of the wave damage that's done? Not just the water rising, but these waves, large waves coming in.
Sir, I'll just touch on the impact of the water and the flow and significance of any kind of increased water flow, storm surge, whether it's wave driven or otherwise. It creates conditions that are incredibly hazardous to life. People can't swim or save themselves, which again just emphasizes why it's so critical that people evacuate and get themselves out of harm's way, and that allows them for the assessment with regard to any property or property impacts.
I know search and rescue is obviously the #1 priority immediately after the storm, but we know that the Port of Tampa is critical for the state and the state's economy and the region as well. What can you and the Army Corps of Engineers do to get the port quickly reopened once this storm passes through?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. We're already in conversations with the Army Corps of Engineers, aligned on the need to begin those assessments as quickly as possible to determine whether there were any impacts from the storm or not, and regain and reopen the Port of Tampa. The Port of Everglades is also a critical port on the east coast of Florida. The Port of Everglades remains open for fuel tankers to ensure that commerce continues to flow into the state from other ports that are not in the direct impact of the storm. But sir, I assure you, we in the Corps of Engineers are already in conversation with regard to what it will take to reconstitute the Port of Tampa, and we will lean into that work as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Admiral. Appreciate it.
Commandant, I echo the President's words. Thank you for what you and the men and women of the Coast Guard have been doing in response to Hurricane Helene and now this. And your emphasis on the importance of the port in Tampa is critically important to recovery. So thank you for all the work that you are doing. I know that resources are spread thin in terms of your folks being on the ground in every area right now, and you're doing an extraordinary job. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Madam Vice President.
To each of the dedicated professionals on this screen, we are truly in your debt and in debt to your teams for what they are doing right now to prepare for and respond to what is coming to Florida this evening. With that, we will conclude the public part of this briefing. And if you'll just stay on the screen for a few minutes, we can
I say one closing
have further
thing?
conversation. Of course, Mr. President.
Pass on to your folks how much we respect and understand. A lot of these folks are risking their lives.
Yes.
They're risking their lives to help other people. I mean, this is Americans helping Americans in ways that, when, to me, it's a measure of who we are as a nation when we see this happen. And it constantly happens. Americans stepping up to help other Americans and risking their lives. So thank all these first responders. It really matters. Really, from the bottom of our heart, thank you, thank you, thank you. Sorry. We're ready.
Mr. President, what's your message to Donald Trump?
All right, that concludes the public portion of the briefing. We will get that out of the way. We are back to the live shots. What I noticed most there, and I think we're going to try to wrap this up reasonably soon, but what I noticed most there was that the head of NOAA is going to be in Tallahassee to monitor from there. So, that's Tallahassee. Last I checked, it's going to be on the outskirts of this, but certainly isn't going to be missed. So, is Andrew, any thoughts?
That last little bit, I don't know why. Maybe it's my inappropriate brain. President, can I say one last thing? No, Mr. President, you can't. Of course they're going to let him say one last thing.
I'm sorry, I had the same thought. He was just like, may I? It's just like, no, you're only the president of the United States and everybody here works at your pleasure. We're going to say you can't say anything. The exact same thought. I'm sorry, entered my head. Oh, dear Lord. We do have 2 super chats I want to call out. We've been waiting because there's just been a lot of important stuff coming in. But while we've got a moment, 𝐍𝐢𝐜𝐴 Music, £9.99. Thanks both, and awesome Discord contribution for these updates. Great work. It has been amazing too. And again, I should stop focusing on the past so much, because we've got a lot. I think we've got a bright future and a lot going for us going forward. But we've been down for a bit, and it's amazing to see everybody really just coming right back into things. It's almost as if nobody's skipping a step. So I certainly appreciate it, and I think our viewers and we have a lot of new viewers because it's been a while. And, I think they get to see us at our best already coming out of the gate. I'm very thankful for that, and that's you guys making that happen. So thank you, and thank you, 𝐍𝐢𝐜𝐴 for your super chat and for your contribution in that Discord as well, because that has not gone unnoticed. Annette, $5. Any info if the FEMA Reddit page is doing any good prior to the hurricane? What was the purpose to make this page? I haven't a clue. I am not often on Reddit. I don't know the status of that, but I will check in. I will check on it, and that may also be on the Discord. So for those of you just joining us or who've been with us for a while, we are now tracking 7 tornadoes. It was as high as 10. It has been quite erratic. Looks like it's going to be staying well above 4 now for a while. When we were first made the decision to go live, we knew of only 1. By the time we went live, there were 4. And at this point, it looks like it's hovering pretty much between 7 and 10, and that is only going to get worse. These are the, what's the classification? I forgot the classification now. PDS, storms potentially dangerous situation, which again still feels like a misnomer. We need to learn to get better at naming things, but it's a higher classification of tornado that basically says they're expected to be stronger, last longer, and are more dangerous than a typical tornado. So this has not yet made landfall, as you can see the pictures here, and I've even seen some people picture on the live chat for these streams saying, well, it doesn't look all that bad. The hurricane has not landed yet. It's going to land sometime between midnight tonight and 2 a.m. in the morning. We're trying to establish what we think is more credible at landing as a 3 or a 4. Right now, all official sources are still saying that they believe it's going to land as a very strong Category 3. Some less official sources that we nonetheless do take quite seriously think it's going to be a 4. So we're trying to figure that out. If you want to see our information, how we go about trying to reach the conclusions that we reach, and if you want to contribute in any way, come join us on the Discord or just watch, and hopefully we can be of service there. And we're going to, I think, have to figure out how much coverage we're going to be doing. Right now we're planning on doing updates as they become necessary, but at some point they may become just so necessary that we're just going to stay on for a rather long period of time. So we're going to keep an eye on it. You just saw the president being briefed. It was a public briefing on the status of the hurricane. We have covered already, I'm not going to recover, but we've covered already the numbers that we're looking at for water and waves. It looks like easily at least over the 48 line in Tampa Bay, which would be that's the highest altitude in Tampa. So I think it's going to be there's going to be a lot to keep an eye on. And as he said, and as you mentioned, streamers who are like, oh, I'm going to stay there because, this is obviously very different. This accelerated faster than anyone has ever seen. It is now doubled in size. It's going to be huge, and I think it's going to be bad. Any final words before we go, as Andrew?
Well, it's also important to realize that there has been, I've seen quite a bit of quibbling about, hey, is it going to be Category 3 or Category 4? And on the ground, in reality, it doesn't matter. Whether it drops further from a current Category 4 down to a Category 3, it's not going to affect the storm surge significantly. Where it makes landfall will have more impact than the downgrading of the hurricane. You may have slightly less damaging winds, but still damaging winds, and it's not going to affect the storm surge. That's already been generated. That's already being pushed forward. And a drop of 30-mile-per-hour winds is not going to significantly affect the impacts of the storm. So I realize that for classification reasons, we want to try and get the best estimates as we can, but it's not going to make much of a difference either way.
And they did say that, and that's an excellent point to reiterate, so thank you for that. All right, folks, if you want to get the updates as we do them, make sure you hit the bell, and I guess you got to go to all notifications. We are going to be staying on this for as long as it's an issue, and we will come back for another update as needed and stay on as needed. But until then, I think we're going to take a break. Give everyone a break. You can join us on the Discord. Thank you very much for your support, everyone. Thank you for your help, and we will catch up with you when we next meet. Have a good one.